So, so what is the purpose of today's webinar? Well, we have a couple of objectives that we'd like to cover. First, we want to review very briefly the purpose, format, and specification for the reports. We want to go over the guidance documents that have already been prepared to create the reports. We've developed some frequently asked questions that respond to questions we have gotten from you about creating the reports. We want to just go over those. Um, and as particularly, we want to review the importance of age adjusting the estimates, including in the report. And we also have a couple of new tools that hopefully will make this a little bit easier for those of you who normally don't do age adjustment. So that's kind of the overall purpose of today's webinar. Next slide, please. And here we just have the agenda that we'll go through, which pretty much follows the purposes that I just mentioned, doing the welcome and webinar goals right now. I'll do that. And then I'll talk a little bit again about how to create the report, why we're creating the report, turn it over to one of my colleagues from the Secretariat to talk about the format and to walk through the guidance documents, and another Secretariat member talking about frequently asked questions. And then we're going to have one of your colleagues, Riaza Fatima from the Maldives Statistical Agency, who is going to give a small case study, share some of her experiences preparing a country report. And then we'll go over some of the resources that we have for completing the reports that we'll be making available to you. Either we have already done that or we'll do that after the report, and then open the floor for questions and answers from you. Next slide, please. So first, briefly, why are we creating the reports? Just to review. Next slide. The decision to do these standard reports was made at the Washington Group annual meeting in 2019. This was done in response to one of the original Washington Group mandates, which was to support dissemination of data. And since the most widely tool that has been used is the short set, we wanted to focus a dissemination activity around the short set, and decided after some consultation and discussion that we would do that via report as opposed to just standardized tables and other mechanisms, and then place those reports on the Washington Group website for everyone to see. Next slide, please. Now, why is it important to do that, and why is it important to do that now, since we started this all the way back in 2019? And I think over time, particularly since we have been in existence, there has been really a great deal of progress in countries expanding their collection of comparable and quality disability data. But there has been less progress in terms of analyzing those data and disseminating them, particularly in a standardized way. Many countries have put out, reports on their own website, analyzing the data as appropriate for their countries, which is what we really want to have done. But in many other areas of statistics, I'm just going to pick employment as one, there tends to be a standardized way that countries disseminate information so that it's easy to compare across countries. And this is, sometimes through the SDGs or reporting to UNSD. Or in other mechanisms, there's agreed upon indicators, agreed upon formats, and so forth. This hasn't quite happened yet in disability. I think there's good reason for that. It's a much broader topic. It hits everything. It doesn't have a kind of often a unique home. So we haven't seen that kind of standardized reporting. And what has happened, and I think is a disservice, is that there seems to be a mistaken belief that there are no data. And I hear this over and over again as I go to meetings. There are data. It's just they are not as out there as much as in other situations. And we wanted to address that misconception and meet the original analysis dissemination mission of the Washington Group. And so this standard country report that we developed back in 2019 is a good way to meet both of these objectives. We can make it very public and be very open about all the data that you've been collecting, make it easy for people to see it in a standardized way, and just kind of encourage more analysis and dissemination of data. These reports have really a very kind of circumspect objective. They're not intended to answer every question about disability. They're providing basic information on prevalence and showing a few disaggregations in hopefully in standard areas. And then hopefully when we get multiple reports from different countries and different regions, if we look at them all together, we'll be able to get a good idea of this very basic information about disability across the world. Next slide, please. So the specific purposes of the country report, again, disseminate basic comparable disability statistics for as many countries as we can. As many countries as have data that are appropriate for use in this report, we would like to get a report from all of those countries and be able to put them on the Washington Group website. So in order to make them comparable, we need to use the same question set. Using different question sets always results in different estimates, and that is not the intent here. We want to be comparable. If we all use the same guidance for creating the disability dichotomy using the same question sets, we'll again increase comparability. And if we all age adjust in the same way, then again, we will be increasing comparability in terms of the information that's provided. And if we follow a standard format for the text and the charts, then we will have that kind of consistency in the report so a user, a reader, can go from one report to the other. And we perhaps at one point may have tried to combine them or compile them in some way. But we also wanted to give every country the flexibility of presenting some unique results depending on their country specific interests. So there's a place in the report where you can use your own indicators and define them as you want. Up to you how much you want to do that. The standard report was designed to be short, so it'd be relatively easy for everyone to create. Anyone who wants to go beyond that, the more the better. Again, we'll publish these on the website, and we are hoping to be able to have a side event, or actually a pre-summit event at the 2025 Global Disability Summit, where this information will be presented. We've been in conversation with the host country, Germany, about being able to do this. We believe there will be a session on April 1st before on data, and we would very much like these reports to be included in those data, but we do have to have kind of a critical mass of reports in order to make it viable. Next slide, please. So I am now going to turn this back over to Julie, who is going to go over the format for the country disability report. And I just, in closing, want to encourage you to ask questions as today. If time doesn't permit, come to the follow-up webinars that we'll talk about and ask all of your questions. And if that doesn't work, get one-on-one assistance, and we'll describe how you can go about doing that. We really want to have kind of a push over the next month to get these things done and to make it life as easy as possible for anyone willing to develop one. So, Julie, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Again, hello, colleagues. In this part of the presentation, I'm going to walk through the actual country report sample that we have developed using data from the United States. And I'm going to go page by page to highlight some of the content on each page. Content that has been agreed upon by the Washington Group membership and endorsed as part of the development of these standard reports. But also content where there is, as Jennifer mentioned, flexibility for a country to show data that are not in the standard reports, or in some cases use an indice that is different than the standard if those data aren't collected. So the reports in general are meant to look very similar. This is the standard look. We don't have all of these reports yet, but I mocked up pictures of them so people could see generally what they would look like at a distance, and what the standard template would look like for this first page. As Jennifer said, the reports are intended to be short so that we minimize the burden on statistical offices. We know that you have a lot to do, but there is enough flexibility to allow for a product that serves you as well, that you can use in your country to inform your needs and highlight your data. So these reports can range anywhere from as short as 5 to 6 to 7 pages, or they can go much longer depending on the content that you would like to highlight. Okay, so let's start with a very high overview of the best practices for these reports. We've already talked quite a bit about using a very standard template in both the text and the figures and the sections for each report. We're using data collected using the Washington Group short set on functioning, and we're using the international standard cutoff that has been adopted by the Washington Group, the dichotomous yes with disability or no without disability, where that cutoff is any, a lot, or cannot do it all to any one of those 6 short set questions. And we have a guidance document that tells you how to create that disability indicator. It also provides coding, statistical coding in SAS and other platforms to create that disability indicator. We have agreed that the prevalence for the prevalence figures that are presented in the chart will be given by age, and those would be 10-year age groups, starting generally at age 18. These reports really are meant to highlight data for adults in the population, given that the short set is best applied for adults. But we're going to talk a little bit about how that might vary depending on whether a country wishes to include data that was collected on children. As Jennifer also mentioned, we have agreed to age adjust, and we will talk a little bit throughout the webinar about the need and the reason for age adjusting, and a little bit about how to do that in this webinar. I suspect in follow-up webinars, we can get in much more detail about that age adjustment process. In terms of age adjustment, we will use a standard world population. That's the 2020 population. And we have provided a number of resources that not only tell you how to age adjust, but provide in Excel spreadsheets those actual population, the population estimates and distribution. So we have that for you. The report has an initial upfront section, an introduction to disability, and then it moves into a couple of figures disseminating data on prevalence. The first is by age group. The second is by overall disability, with and without, and then disability in each of the 6 domains. And the next section of the report presents a number of outcome indicators that are disaggregated by disability. So in the template, we've chosen education, some kind of economic indicator such as income or poverty, and then employment. And each of these figures, as you'll see, are disaggregated by the standard dichotomous with or without disability. And then there's the space for the country-specific figures, which we'll talk about. And I will show you in this template an example of what we chose to use from the US data. Okay, so let's start with page 1. The good news on page 1 is there's very little for you to do other than to put your country's name on the title. Much of the content on page 1 is a review of the importance of disability, how disability is defined, and how we have followed the International Classification of Functioning and Disability framework. The front page also talks a little bit about the Washington Group's approach to disability. And then you'll see here on the far right column of this first page, the actual 6 questions, and how at the very bottom, disability is collected using a continuous response set. So on this first page, all of the text is available to you to repeat. And again, we're highlighting disability importance, its definition, and conceptualization. Again, on the first page, very little needs to be done in terms of changing any of the content, except of course your country will be highlighted in the title of the report and on this first page. The other thing that I would like to call attention to is there are 4 footnotes that are used in this country report. 2 of them are called out on the first page that you would want to include. So if you're including the standard text, then you certainly want to include those footnotes. And I'm pointing out that 2 of those are referenced on page 1. Now we're going to move to page 2, which is where we start to talk about both the data, but we also have our very first figure, and it is a prevalence figure. So let me focus on the top part of this page 2, which is a description of the data. We talk about the name of the data source, the year. We talk about any sampling issues as well as what the population is representative of. So for example, in the US data, this is representative of the national population living, civilian population living in the community for the most part. There is some content on the methods, basically to alert the reader to the fact that some of these estimates are age adjusted, and there is a footnote here that will be used in most reports. But also for the US, we've added a sentence or 2 that indicates that the estimates provided meet our presentation standards. And so you may have several sentences or some content related and specific to your data source that will be important to call out on that in that data section as we move from the introduction and transition to our figures. And then we have a figure, our first figure on the prevalence of disability, which I'm going to go over in more detail in the next several slides. But I do want to call out that we have this title, Prevalence of Disability, and in general, we are reporting very high level results from this figure. And those results are in the form of bullets and they fall before the figure. And you'll see this pattern repeated on subsequent pages of the reports. So on page 2, this is your content here on the data that you are using and anything related that you would not necessarily want to convey to a user about that data, especially who is represented by that data. So let's move on to the prevalence of disability. What we've decided to do for figure 1 is to provide to a reader not only the overall estimate of disability for the entire population age 18 and over, but then give these very specific estimates of disability by age group. So this is the prevalence in adults, and it is the overall prevalence, which this estimate is age adjusted. And then it is the age-specific prevalences, which are not age adjusted. We don't age adjust when we actually have a specific age group being reported. I do want to call attention to this last category, which for the United States is age 80 and above. That's because the data are released to the public and are top coded in this way. So we cannot provide, for example, the estimate for an age group 90 and 80 to 89 and 90 and above. But if your data set has a different top coded age group, then that can be changed. You can report as far out as you're able to, given the precision and reliability of your data. So just to review, for figure 1, you're calculating the age-specific prevalences for the population 18 and over using these 10-year age groups, preferably ending with 90 years and over, but this will depend on the top coding practices of the data that you are using. And then for that overall estimate, that will include some age adjustment of that prevalence of that population. Using the standard 2020 world population, we'll talk a little bit about the guidance that is available to do that. And then anything that is related to your data source in terms of definitions or specific issues that need to be called out would also be included around that in the footnotes. I mentioned earlier that some countries may have collected data for children, and I want to talk about what one would do for figure 2 if you are interested in presenting those estimates for children. We've created an alternate figure 1 that shows both the 5 and over population estimate as well as this 18 and over. So we're preserving the 18 and over population estimate bar so that we can compare across countries. But if you have collected data for the population 5 and over, and you very much wish to report on that population, then we are encouraging you to provide a separate bar for the 5 and over. And you'll see here that what would also be new for this figure 2 is an age group for that younger population. So this is the alternate figure 1. If you are using data for 5 and over, and we can talk about why we would not want to present data for the under 5 population. And this would include 2 new bars in your figure 1 that are not shown in the US template. We did not collect data using the short set on the population under 18. Very briefly, the findings, as I mentioned, for these figures are very high level. So we're not writing a great deal of text and going into detail about every difference in terms of the bars and the data being presented. We're mentioning the total overall age-adjusted rates. We are specifically presenting and probably writing a bullet about the 18 and over population, the adult population, so as to maximize comparability. If there is a bar showing the 5 and over, a bullet of text can be included that reports on the overall age-adjusted estimate for the 5 and over population. And then we have a sentence about the pattern of disability prevalence by age, which in general, certainly for the United States, but for many countries, as the estimate of disability increases with age, with the lowest prevalence among the younger age groups and the highest prevalences, of course, among the older age groups. So that's page 1, figure 1. Let me move to page 3, where generally speaking, figure 2 will be presented. And this is another prevalence figure. In this case, we're not showing by age group. What we're showing is the total estimate for disability, and then disability for males and females. And we're doing that for the overall any disability indicator again. But then we're also showing those estimates, again, the total for males and females for walking, cognition, and the rest of the individual domains of disability. So once again, we have a figure, and right above that figure, we have 3 bullets with the results of those, of what you see across the bars in this figure. Again, just another picture of figure 2, where I'm showing that we are now providing prevalence by male and female and total of any disability, just like we did on the last chart. So this 7.2 was the same on figure 1. And then by individual domain of functioning. And again, those are age-adjusted estimates. And we're happy to help with doing that for each domain, but the process of age adjusting is the same. So I've now covered the first 2 figures, the two prevalence figures, and at this point we move to the section of the report where we are disaggregating these 3 major outcomes by disability. So there's a short description that follows those 2 prevalence figures that talks about disaggregation and the importance and value of disaggregation. And again, here we reference, we have this next reference that you'll want to include if you copy this text, which we would suggest that you do, that talks really about the SDGs and the importance for disaggregating those goals. And after this introduction to disaggregation, we move on to our first outcome, which is educational attainment. So let me move to education. In this figure, we are showing different levels of educational attainment. And I'm going to call out specifically attainment because this is completed education. Since this report is on presenting data for adults, generally speaking, this will, for the most part, be completed education. And what we do is we show different levels of education. So in the US, we start with those who have not completed a high school degree. We have a section for those who have completed upper secondary or our high school equivalent. Here are the group that have completed some college, but not necessarily finished a degree. And then we have a final group that has finished their degree. And each of those levels of education is presented for those with disability and those without. This is the basic look for a disaggregated outcome. It doesn't matter what the outcome is, we present the levels of that outcome by the dichotomous disability indicator. And what you see in general when you disaggregate is usually a gap between those without disability and those with. And that's really the disability gap in terms of whatever we're talking about for the outcome. So in figure 3 of the reports, we start with education. We encourage this to be the standard figure 3 for all. But here is a place where there may need to be some flexibility in terms of what categories you use. These categories are standard in the US. You may have a very different standard in your region, in your country, or perhaps you are using the standard that is set by another international organization. So again, we are we allow flexibility here. We prefer that at least some of the categories overlap. For example, those completing upper secondary in your country may be the equivalent of those completing high school here. But this is one of those places, and in fact, all of the outcome figures, 3, 4, and 5, are places where some flexibility in terms of which indicator you use can be allowed. So, figure 3, we're going to very quickly, as a review, we're going to calculate the levels of education. We're going to age adjust those, and then we're going to disaggregate by disability. We're going to report a few of the high level findings just above that figure, and then we are going to move on to the next outcome indicator, which is family income. Again, family income is the economic indicator that is used most frequently in the data set being used here in this US report. There are, we understand, other economic indicators that perhaps are used in your country. So moving on to figure 4, here we have family income disaggregated by disability. And in the US, we're showing this as a percentage of the poverty level. So these 3 categories are different levels of percentages of the poverty level. And you see those disability gaps changing depending on what level you're reporting. And then the final disaggregation figure that is standard is one that reflects some kind of employment status. Again, here we just use a very simple employment status, employed versus not employed in the last week. That's very typical of for this data source, and that is what is provided here. We know that there are other employment standards. You may be using one that is set by ILO, or again, one that is used frequently in your country. And that is disaggregated by disability again. So this is section 2 of the report. These 3 standard outcomes disaggregated by disability, reported in age adjustment estimates. And now we are moving on to the 3rd section of the report, where a country has some flexibility to report out on some indicators that are of importance to you. Do you have to include additional figures? No. Right now, I have presented what are the standard set, but you can move on to present others. And I'm going to show some examples from this US report. This was an overview of the steps which we just went through for those figures 4 and 5. Okay. So again, we're in the section where a country can provide their specific outcome indicators. And because the data from the US are coming from a major health interview survey, we've chosen a number of health-related indicators to show. And in this first one, we are reporting out on vaccination status, both for influenza as well as for pneumonia. The look is the same as the other outcomes. We are disaggregating by with and without disability status, and we report some of the high-level findings from those differences in the bullets above. The estimates are age adjusted for this outcome. The final figure in the US report shows one on trends. We're very lucky to have been able to collect the short set data for many years, which allows us to look at trends over time. So immediately following our figure on vaccination, we present these trends in disability, and you can see the bullets presenting those high level findings here. But here's what our figure looks like, our trends over time. This top line is the any disability trend, and these are the trends over time for the individual domains of functioning. So our figures 6 and 7 are the optional figures that we chose to highlight, since those we have data on those things in your country that may be different. And this brings me to the final section of the report, which should be standard, and that's references. I've mentioned all along that that the first two references, the number 1 and 2, are used on page 1. So your report will include these two references. And then references 4 and 5 for the US report are the ones that call out the world population estimates, and also the a citation for the SDGs. So you will likely use these two references as well, although they may not be numbers 4 and 5. We have a reference that we need to use related to the methods specific to the National Health Interview data. So that fell in between those. But this is the references section. And this brings us to the conclusion of kind of reviewing in a page-by-page way what is included in these reports and where there are standards and where there's some flexibility. There have been developed a number of resources that provide some guidance to you in developing these reports, in addition to the one-on-one guidance and the personal guidance that we can help you with. There is a very large document that, in very similar way to this presentation, takes you through page by page how to create a country disability report. So we do have that guidance. Of course, we have a guidance document that tells you how to take the 6 questions of the short set and create a disability identifier. That includes, as I mentioned before, the steps, the statistical packages, SAS, data, SPSS, and R, depending on what your country uses when you analyze your data. We have a guidance document on best practices for age adjustment. And it takes you through exercises using data from the US, Mexico, and New Zealand. We appreciate their contribution to that report and being able to use those data to really highlight the need for age adjustment and why, given the age structure of your population, it can skew the estimates for disability when trying to compare across countries. So that takes you through step-by-step examples of age adjustment. And then we have a document, this is an Excel document that provides you with the ability to drop in your estimates, and it spits out the overall age-adjusted prevalence estimates. And you'll hear more about that in the FAQ section. And then regardless of how you're age adjusting, whether you're doing that within your statistical package or in Excel, we do have Excel tables that provide the 2020 world population, and we give that in single years and in different age groups to match whatever you are using. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn this over to Natalie Young, who is the 3rd member of the Secretariat to speak today, to go over some of the frequently asked questions that we are receiving as we have journeyed along in this project. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Julie. I just want to confirm that you're able to hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to talk about some of the questions that we frequently receive from countries regarding this report. Next slide, please. So we get a lot of questions about age adjustment, and I do want to draw your attention to the fact that there are several places within the report where we ask you to present age-adjusted estimates. And so on this page, I'm just giving you an overview of 3 figures within the report. These are not the only figures that ask for age adjustment, but these are examples. And you'll see that I've circled that they are requesting that you provide an age-adjusted estimate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the questions we get about creating those estimates that are needed for these figures and other text within the report. Next slide, please. So the first question that we often get is, do I really need to age adjust estimates? Not all countries routinely age adjust their disability data. And we understand that that may be the case in your country, that this is not something that is typically done when you report disability data out for your country. However, for these standardized reports, it is essential. This is because, as you can imagine, age adjustment is necessary if we're trying to compare disability estimates across countries, which is really our goal with these reports, as well as providing information about your country. We want to be able to look across countries. As prior research has shown, disability has a strong relationship with age, as many of us know. And as a result, in particular, we see that disability rates tend to be higher at older ages. So if we don't age adjust our estimates in these reports, countries that have a large old age population may appear to have higher disability rates compared to countries that have a large young age population. By age adjusting disability estimates, we can better compare those disability rates across countries that have different age structures. And if you want more information about the motivation for age adjustment, please do, Julie, go ahead and click next on the slide, please. If you want more information about age adjustment, please do refer to the guidance document that we've prepared, Washington Group Best Practices for Age Adjustment of Disability Data. That document was shared previously when you received, I believe it was about 5 guidance documents from the Washington Group earlier this year. Julie just talked about all of them. And that particular guidance document, the best practices for age adjustment of disability data, it not only talks about, it goes into greater detail about these reasons for age adjustment, but it also gives an example of how it's important by comparing data from Mexico and New Zealand. Next slide, please. Another question that we've received is, do I need to age adjust estimates if using census data? And you can click next, Julie. And the answer to this is yes, even census data must be age adjusted. It's true that if every member of the population is surveyed, census data are not subject to sampling error. But sampling error is not what we're trying to account for when age adjusting. The age adjustment, again, is really intended to allow us to compare disability rates across countries. Next slide, please. Another question we commonly get is, what standard population should I use to age adjust my country's estimates? Next. For this, you can refer to the guidance documents that we've provided. Again, I've mentioned it previously, the Washington Group Best Practices for Age Adjustment of Disability Data. Within that document, there is an appendix. I just want to talk a little bit more, before I talk more about that appendix, I want to talk a little bit more about what the standard population is and how we generally select one. To age adjust disability estimates, a country's age-specific disability rates are applied to a standard age distribution. That's how we're essentially standardizing. The choice of the standard age distribution, which we often call the standard population, that choice is generally determined by the analyst. And the choice of that standard doesn't affect results unless you're again trying to compare standardized estimates, age-adjusted estimates across countries. In that case, you want to make sure that all of those age-adjusted estimates were adjusted to the same standard population. So that is why we've provided you with the exact standard population that we're getting everyone to use when producing these age-adjusted estimates. And again, that can be found in the appendix of the guidance document, Washington Group Best Practices for Age Adjustment of Disability Data. Next slide, please. When you open up that appendix within this guidance document, what you'll see is the image here. This is just the top of the appendix page, and you'll see it says 2020 World Population Estimates with a citation to where those estimates come from. You'll note, however, that there are several tables within that appendix. So another question we've received is, which of these tables do I use for age adjustment? For example, you'll see the first table provided is the 2020 world population by single age year. You'll also see the 2020 world population by 5-year age groups, by 10-year age groups, and you'll also notice that the population presented in these tables may also vary. The population may be the population ages 18 and up, it may be the population 5 and up, or in table A, you see it's the entire population starting at age 0. So in terms of which version, which table to use, if you click the next slide, I'll talk a bit about that. So the answer to this question is that you should use the 10-year age groups. Although the appendix also provides all these different versions of the 2020 world population, these different ways of grouping the age groups, that's really provided as a resource. For example, that table A that shows the single year the single year age groups, that can be used to create population counts for any age group that you wish or need for the report or for other purposes. So that's really a great resource. But in the report, you're really going to primarily rely on the 10-year age group tables. So that would be table E and table F. Whether you use table E or table F is going to depend on what population you're talking about in your report. In the US report, we talk about the population aged 18 and over, which is also the population that we ask you to report in your standard report. If you're talking about the population 18 and over, you're going to use table E. However, some folks have said, hey, what if I want to include the population of children, not just adults? And we are happy to have additional information on children in these reports. We just ask that it be the child population 5 and up rather than the under 5 population. So if your population in your report is going to be all individuals in your country ages 5 and up, you're going to actually use table F in the appendix. I should mention that when you're age adjusting estimates for indicators like employment and educational attainment, you may need to create your own standard population tables. For example, if you want to calculate an age-adjusted estimate of employment status for the population ages 18 to 64, say that is your working age population, you only want to look at that population when talking about employment, that's your choice, right? You want it to be 18 to 64. Then you're going to need to use a standard population that only includes the population ages 18 to 64. Tables E and F include the population 18 and over in table E, or the population 5 and up in table F. So if you want a standard table for the 18 to 64 population, you're going to use table A, that single year table, the single age year table, to create your standard population table. And if you need help or have questions about that process, we are very much here to help. And I'll talk more about resources for individualized help like that later in this FAQ session. All right, thank you very much, Julie. So the next question we often get is, how do I age adjust disability estimates? We've created several resources to help with this. You can click next, Julie. Thank you. The first resource I've talked about a number of times already. That is the Washington Group Best Practices for Age Adjustment of Disability Data. This is a guidance document that walks you through how to age adjust estimates, including by providing examples. Please note that we will be providing a new version of this document that includes an update to the appendix, so that the appendix includes table F for folks who are talking about the population, including children ages 5 and up. So keep your eyes out for that. I think I hear some music. If someone is able to mute themselves, or actually, I think I was able to mute you, so we're all good. Great. All right, the second resource we have is the 2020 World Population Estimates Worksheet. Really, this is a new resource, and really all it is it's taking that appendix from that best practices document. It's taking that appendix and it's putting it in an Excel document. That makes it a lot easier for folks to create their own standard population tables if they're creating estimates for various indicators in their report, or if they are just wanting to use these standard population tables for other projects. The third resource that we have is an age adjustment exercise worksheet. And this is really neat, in my opinion. It's an Excel workbook where you can input your unadjusted rates of disability in your country for each age group. And Excel is going to calculate the age adjusted estimates for you. And if you click next, Julie, I can show everyone what this looks like. Great. So this is just a clip out of a screenshot of that new resource. And what you'll see is that you've got in column B, the standard age distribution from the standard population. Column C is where you're going to input the age-specific disability rates in your country. And if you click next, Julie. Yep. So there you're going to enter the prevalence of disability for each age group. All right. And if you click next, you'll see it's going to calculate the age-adjusted disability rate for the population. And if you click next, we'll see it at work. Perfect. So, oh, sorry, previous, my apologies. All right, so you see it at work right here. So we've put in the age-specific disability rates in column C from your country, and you don't have to do anything for that last column. That last column and that highlighted row, that highlighted cell is calculated by Excel, and you can then take those estimates and put them right into your report. All right, can you click next, please, Julie? And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that this worksheet has two different tabs. The table that I just showed you is if you are trying to get age-adjusted estimates for the population 18 and up. But here you see that we also provide one of these worksheets if you are talking about the population 5 and up. All right, so it works the same way. Can you click next, please? Great. All right, so we've talked about the age adjustment exercise worksheet. The other resource we've developed, which I know we've gotten some chat questions about today, is new syntax for age adjusting disability data. So we have syntax in SAS, as well as status syntax for age adjusting for the figures in the report. And so we will be sharing that as well. In terms of individual assistance, there are also a number of resources. The first one would be the follow-up webinars in this webinar series, known as the question and answers sessions, which is basically individualized assistance in preparing reports on disability. You come to these webinars, you can ask questions, it'll be an open discussion, and you'll get answers to those questions. If you don't get all the support from those webinars as you need or want, or if they're not at convenient times, and I'll talk more about when those are happening, they're going to be in July, then we also have one-on-one technical support offered by Daniel Mott. And I'll talk further later today about how to request that one-on-one support. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to move through a few more frequently asked questions. So the first question that I wanted to mention is that again and again, we've been asked, can I include children in this report? The US report focuses on adults, right? It's ages 18 and up. And most reports we expect are going to do the same. But if you did ask the Washington Group short set of children as well, and you would like to include those estimates in your report, you can. Next, please. We do want to mention one caveat, however. So we do want to note that disability among children is not adequately covered by the short set questions due to the circumstances of child development and the transition from infancy through adolescence. That being said, we generally have seen that folks have at times used the short set to describe child functioning or measure child functioning for children ages 5 to 17. And for the purposes of these reports, if that's something that your country did, you collected data on child functioning using the short set for children 5 to 17, go ahead and include it in the report. However, it's not recommended that you report estimates based on the short set for children under 5. And again, since these reports are going to be focusing on the short set, we don't want you to be using a different measure that you might have used to measure disability among the under 5 population. So we just ask that you exclude the under 5 population from your report. Next slide, please. Another question we've got is in figure 2, where you present disability rates by domain. What if I want to include children, not just adults, in this figure? And Julie has talked about this a little bit before, but we just want to mention that, as we know, the rates of different domains of functioning, difficulty in different domains of functioning, vary a lot by age, particularly between adults and children. So if you hit next. So we do ask that if you decide to also report domains of disability for the child population, please create 2 versions of figure 2, one for ages 18 and up and one for ages 5 to 17. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to indicators of disability. Indicators by disability status. One question that we've received is, when I calculate educational attainment, employment, and family income by disability status, what ages should be included? If you click next. Julie has mentioned before that really these indicators are intended for the adult population. That's why they were selected. So please present them for the population ages 18 and up. Note that you may be interested in including other indicators that are relevant for the child population if you are also talking about children in your report, but those would be separate indicators. So for example, estimates of school enrollment, that would be a separate indicator that you had the option of including, in addition to talking about educational attainment, completed education among adults. Next slide, please. There's also this question about what categories should I use for these variables: educational attainment, employment, and family income. Next, please. So you'll notice in the US report, these are the categories that are used. Education has 4 categories. Employment is a dichotomous variable, a binary variable, and family income has 3 categories. So do you use these same categories in your report? Next, please. The answer to that is a little bit nuanced. We would like you to use those categories that are used in the US report. We see those as standard categories in the US. And for comparability, it would be nice if all the reports are using similar or the same categories. That being said, if your country prefers to or can only follow a different standard, that is also fine. Examples of other standards that your country may decide it needs to follow for the categories of these indicator variables would be regional standards or standards determined by different international organizations. For example, the International Standard Classification of Education Levels, or it could be a country-specific standard. All right, next slide, please. Another question we receive is, what do I do if these indicators, educational attainment, employment, or family income, what if they're not available in my data? Next. The answer to that is somewhat straightforward, I think. If the data are not available, you can't present those indicators in your report. Now, you may say, we actually have that indicator in a different data set. If you would like to add that analysis from the other data set to your report, you're welcome to, but that is not necessary. It's not required. It's really up to you. I do also want to mention that for the family income variable, if you don't have data on family income in your data set, or you don't generally talk about family income based on poverty levels like we do in the US, but you have data on a different economic indicator that is a standard way of talking about economic well-being in your country, please use that other economic indicator instead. Next, please. All right, I don't want to take up too much time, so I do want to just note that if you click next, Julie, I'll just point out that estimates of vaccination status in the US report are not required. We sometimes get that question. That is a country-specific indicator that we included, so don't worry about it. And if you click next, however, you are welcome to include other indicators of disability status. Great. Go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit more about all of those resources for individualized attention later today. But for now, I want to make sure we turn things over to Riasa, who is going to tell us about her experience preparing one of these reports for the Maldives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for actually going through the questions, the frequently asked questions, which was in fact something we also had to deal with when we were preparing the country report for Maldives. So just to start off, next slide. We actually I want to present our experience and challenges we faced when we first embarked on preparing the Maldives country report on disability. Next slide. So when we first started working on the country disability report, we thought what would be the best source for us to prepare it. The thought of preparing the country report came up right after we had our household income and expenditure survey done in 2019. And but we had the results out in 2020, and it was at that time we were also planning to do census as well in 2020, but due to COVID, our census process got delayed, and we were able to do it in 2022. So in between, what we were thinking was what would be the best source for us to report on Maldives disability, and we thought, okay, so if we can delay it by a few 1 or 2 years, it would be best to go with census findings because we were thinking that it might not be most appropriate to have the first country report based on a survey. But these are things again which we internally talked about, and but the answer we get from the Washington group is something different. But anyway, as we move forward, and we had the report done for the census 2022. We are still in the process of finalizing the report and have been working together with Washington group to have the final editing done in the report. Next slide. So when we first started with the preparing the report, our team actually looked at what are the similar tables that we can generate from census, similar to what that is there in the US standard report. And our team, when you start working, you get so many good ideas, as well as you start asking questions also. So the first set of questions that our team raised was whether we have to prepare the same graphs as the US standard report, or can we do something more innovative, like instead of having a table, can we add a graph or a map? There are so many new techniques, tools that is made available to show the same information. And then just now, like Natali addressed, we looked at the different answer options we have included in the census. One such example is when it comes to education, especially the educational attainment. The option or the way that we have included the answer category in our census is completely different from what is there in the US standard report. And we actually did try to come up with something that triangulates to the answers given in the US census report. Again, all this was done before we consulted with the Washington group, and we were trying to come up with the set of questions that we can ask the Washington group as well once we did the first initial brainstorming within the team also. So next comes the age group in which we used. Now, when it comes to age grouping, in our census, disability information has been collected for population 5 years and above. And if you look at the US standard report, it's for population 18 years and above. So we were wondering what was the age group that we should use, and should we stick to the locally defined age group in the country, or with the reporting age group that was reported in the US standard report. So with these sort of questions, we actually, before we started generating the data, we sent a mail to Washington group trying to clear these doubts among us within our team. And once we got the answers, a response from Washington group, we moved ahead with the report. And the answers that we got was similar to what Natali just now presented. Next slide. So what we got back from the Washington group is that the disability report is something which is like a standard report that they are preparing. So it's better we stick with the similar graphs and tables that is there, so that it is comparable across countries and to follow the same age group as well. The other challenge that we faced was doing age adjustment. So before we get into doing age adjustment, just to give a context about how it is done in the country, when it comes to Maldives, we have a small population, and we have never done any age adjustment in our census or in any of our surveys. Our census is a complete enumeration and covers our whole population. So we were a bit concerned at that time for us to do age adjustment. The main reason was the numbers, especially the disability prevalence numbers, which we get out by doing age adjustment, is going to be different from what we have already published in our official dissemination So that raised a bit of a concern among ourselves. But again, coming back to what Natalie and Julie has mentioned, this is a report which is comparable across countries, and age adjustment is done for the 18 plus population. So we thought, okay, since we have presented disability for population 5 years and above, and the age categorization is different from what we use locally, it is okay for us to do age adjustment and present a different number, provided that we can state at the beginning of the report that the age adjustment has been done as such and the reason behind it. Next slide. Next is coming up with the content for the report. So we thought about what could be the possible indicators that we can present in our report. So we started off with similar indicators that is there in the US disability report that is showing disability prevalence by age and by locality, which is ATOLs for us, disability prevalence by gender and by age group as well. And in addition to this, we have also included disability severity in our country report. Next. Coming to the socio-economic indicators, what we noticed is in our census, we do not collect any information with regard to income. We do not collect any information with regard to health of the population, because we do have a very good health system in the country. So it's only the very basic information with regard to demography, migration, education, employment, and marital and fertility that we are collecting in our census. So we were trying to come up with indicators, that the best indicators that we could include in our report. Initially, we started working on the report to include some of the SDG indicators, but the way the SDG indicators, some of which it's measured in the country, might be different from how others interpret it as well. So we tried to stick to the very basic indicators with regard to education, such as literacy rate, and we showed educational attainment of our population. Coming back to what I said at the beginning, the way that we have collected information for educational attainment is different from the US, and we have showed whatever information we have collected regarding that. When it comes to labor force indicators, I know in the US Census report, it's in the US disability report, it is very simple, showing those who are employed and in labor force, employed and not employed. We actually have shown labor force indicators by employment, unemployment, those who are employed, those who are unemployed, and those who are outside the labor force. And the other key crucial information that we have included in our report is regarding informal employment, informal jobs. So the reason why we choose indicator is this is of national priority, and it's where most of the women are currently working in the country. So we felt that while it has national importance, it is equally important for us to show it in our disability report as well. So that's about it. In terms of looking at the age group, when it comes to most of these indicators, like educational attainment and labor force indicators, as well as informal employment, we have actually collected this information for 15 years and above population, following the international standards, international guidelines like ILO guidelines and education, UNESCO guidelines, and UNICEF guidelines as well. But for the purpose of this report, we have again regenerated all the tables to include in this report for 18 years and above population. So we are almost done with our report. We just have to incorporate the changes based on the feedback we have got from the Washington group, and we are really grateful for their support throughout our journey. Thank you. I think that's about it. Yeah, thank you. Natal,
Thank you
back
so
to you.
much, Riaza. That was great. All right, so I want to talk about some additional resources. Next slide, please. So first of all, we were expecting to cover a lot of content in today's webinar. And so we expected there wouldn't be as much time for questions and answers today as we would have liked. So the purpose of the follow-up webinars, which are going to be in July, is to answer all of the questions that have already been coming in, as well as additional questions folks might have. So the first session of that questions and answers webinar will be on the 2nd of July at 8 a.m. New York time. There will be a second session on the 11th of July. You can attend both sessions, you can attend one session, but if you're unable to attend those sessions or they don't answer all of your questions, we also have technical assistance from Daniel Mott. Dan, do you want to take a moment to tell us a bit about what assistance you're able to provide and how countries can request it?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as you're working through this, if you have any questions, no matter how small or how large, you can contact me just through emails. If the issues are more complicated than that, we can set up a Zoom call. If you'd like to, if you're writing something up, you're doing some calculations, and you just want another pair of eyes to look over what you've done and see if it sort of fits the template, if it fits the sort of expectations of the report, you can send that to me. I'm happy to review that as well. Basically, I could be as little or as much as you like in terms of assisting you. If you no questions too small or too big, basically. And I think you'll have my email. If not, I should let me put it in the chat, and you can contact me by email.
Yes, thanks, Dan. If you could pop it in the chat, that'd be great. It will also be on the last slide of today's presentation. Great. All right, so as you can see, Dan is a great resource. We really encourage you to reach out to him. He just put his email in the chat. In addition to Dan's support, please feel free to reach out to the Washington Group Secretariat. We can set up one-on-one meetings. We really want you to reach out to us if you have any questions whatsoever. And we are again making note of all of the questions we've been receiving today. Next slide, please. All right, so we had planned a question and answer session if we had time today. Otherwise, our plan was to roll that session into the follow-up webinars, again on the 2nd of July and the 11th of July. So I am wondering if we want to wrap things up today and make note of all of the questions we've received. I've been recording all of them, and we can follow up with them. So here's information about those follow-up webinars where we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of your questions. If you are unable to attend them and you put a question in the chat, please reach out to us. You'll see our email address at the bottom, Washington Group under WG_secretariat at cdc.gov. Please send us an email if you sent a question in the chat and you're unable to attend those follow-up Q&A sessions, and we will be happy to respond to them. Otherwise, I will bring all of those questions to the follow-up webinars. I'm going to hand things back to Julie in case there's anything else that she wants to mention before we close for the day.
Thanks, Natalie. I think this session has had a lot of content, and for those of you who have not started your report, it might be a little bit overwhelming, but for those who are in the middle of the process, I've seen some questions that, are coming in that seem very relevant. There are a couple of high-level things that I thought I would just take a few minutes to address. One is, we realize that countries, depending on their own standards, do not have a lot of experience age adjusting, and that age adjustment will comprise a large proportion of the help sessions that are needed. Again, I do want to say we are happy to help. We know that this may be a new exercise or a different exercise for countries, and we're happy to do that. The other, set of comments that came in really underscore this idea of, in my country, we do this, we use this language, we use this standard, we follow something very different, or our data can only do X and Y and Z, and we can't match what you are showing in the example. I want to mention that in response to this, that, for many cases, we want this report to be as useful to you and your country as it is as a Washington Group product. And so we want this report to use your standards and the language that is typical in your country, especially for the figures 3 and higher, 3, 4, 5, 6 and higher, where we're disaggregating indicators. Those indicators are the standards that you use. If you use a particular economic indicator that is different than the US poverty definition, then use your economic indicator. If you use different levels of education, or you have something different in terms of employment, use those indicators. In that part of the report where we're disaggregating by disability, the value of looking across countries is not necessarily in the actual estimate, the numbers on those bars. It tends to be the gap. So, in some countries, there's not going to be a great deal of gap between that bar of, with disability and without disability. In other countries, you're going to see very large differences between the population with and without disabilities in terms of that outcome. And so it's the relative size of those gaps that are going to be important. I think the most important figures where we want to try to get as much comparability as possible are in the first two, especially the bar that gives the overall prevalence of disability for the adult population 18 and over. This is, there's always an interest. As often as we say there's no single one number for disability, everyone wants to go straight to that one number. What's the size of the population with disability? So in terms of flexibility, I think there's a lot of flexibility in these reports. And we are happy to take your individual questions about that. Last thing that I wanted to mention is about language. I think it was Claire who raised a question about, what language do we use when we are talking about the population of people with disabilities? In the US, for official statistical reporting, we use people first language. So you will see over and over again, adults with disabilities, people with disabilities, men with disabilities, women, children with disabilities. It's people before the word disabilities. In other parts of the world, and even in some portions of the US population, there's a real desire to put the identity first. So it is disabled people, disabled adults, disabled men, that kind of thing. So I would say if that's the language and the standard that you have adopted in your country, then by all means, write your results and your text in a way that follows that standard. I think that is really important. So the last thing that I wanted to mention is if you received an email with the links to this session and the links to the July 2nd and 11th session, You will also, within about a week, receive an email with all of the documents attached that we have highlighted today. So all the age adjustment guidance, the disability indicator creation guidance, the worksheets, all of it. So we will use the same distribution list to send out these documents as we did to send out the link to this meeting. So I'm highlighting that because if you did not receive that email directly with the links, if it was forwarded to you by someone else, then send the secretariat an email. You see the address here, and we will get those documents to you. So we are at time. Once again, I do want to thank everyone. I'm really grateful for the audience here today. We're so happy to see so many of our members and familiar friends and faces here. Thank you for joining, and we really look forward to interacting with you to create a robust set of documents that we can call, the Washington Group Country Reports. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.